So where does that come from? Yeah, sure, maybe some teaching from Bible, but I think there's something in our heart that shows and testifies to us that is good. I mean, Abraham Kuyper actually, when he's talking about this, he would say, man cannot escape the ever-present thou shalt that exists within him. And he's talking about that implanted moral capacity from God. Like you can't escape it. Welcome back to this episode of Theologically Driven. I'm your host, Phil Cecil, and today we're going to continue our discussion from last week on natural law. We'll talk more about biblical arguments for natural law and then begin to discuss some of the content and problems with it. Before we do that, I did want to remind you that fall registration is open. If you're interested in becoming a student here, you can apply at dbts.edu/apply. The application is free. I'd love for you to reach out if you have questions about becoming a student. You can reach us at admissions@dbts.edu. I'd love to hear from you if you'd want to know more. With that, let's jump into the podcast.
Phil, welcome back to the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me be the host again. So
no problem.
I did not do too bad of a job last time. So last time we were talking about natural law.
Yep.
You had written a thesis on it. You defined natural law as the moral order divinely implanted in humankind and accessible to all persons through reason.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, God has created this world such that woven into the fabric of it, there's an oughtness. There's a sense that all people know there's certain things they should do or not do. Mm-hmm. So I think the objection that you have to answer from the scriptures is, first of all, did he really do that? And then second of all, if he did do it, can people, apart from special revelation, grasp it? Are they even aware that it's out there? So today in this episode, we're going to go through some of the biblical arguments. So starting with the Old Testament, how would you defend natural law and defend the idea that it's knowable?
Yeah, a couple of points before we get going into that. I think you'll remember the kind of purpose was within a dispensational framework, thinking through natural law. So as we talk through the various passages, that's the hermeneutical approach I'm taking. There's not too many places where that's mission critical, but in the Romans 2 passage, which is debated, and we'll talk more about it, there are some implications for how you understand the new covenant and what Paul is actually arguing there. So that'll come back up a little bit. But that's kind of the overall guiding framework. And then as we begin to think about biblical arguments for natural law, I was greatly helped by David Haynes and Andrew Fulford. I think it's Davenant Press. They have a very short book. It's very good. I'd recommend it, called Natural Law, A Brief Introduction, and I think it's a brief introduction in biblical defense, something like that. They each take a section, and they argue when one of them makes the exegetical case, they point to three kind of guiding arguments for the whole thing. So the first one is, do the scriptures present an objective, moral, purposeful universe? The second one is, has that moral order been revealed? Is it at least revealed in some way? And number three is, have at least some unregenerate people perceived it? Because again, it comes back to, if no one can perceive it, what's the point? If it's not actually there, what's the point in this whole thing? And I say at least some because I wouldn't argue that for natural law to be a thing, all people have to perceive it equally. Mm-hmm. And we all recognize to some degree, some people are just more morally inclined than others, okay? And their perception of that reality is not 100% the standard for if it exists. So think about one author used the example of like advanced mathematics. Mm. Everyone to some degree can understand math, right? I have this many apples, I add this many apples. But you start talking about theoretical math and stuff that is really difficult. Just because I don't have the capacity to perceive it doesn't mean it's not there. And it's reinforced that it is there by some people have actually worked through the problem, right? So they've been able to figure it out. So and that has downstream effects for the rest of society, right? So some people, if you think of the founders or philosophers or that kind of thing, can think deeply about these issues and help the rest of us kind of guide in that direction. Okay.
So just like physical eyesight, I mean, something's really there, but different people could see it with greater clarity than others. But that doesn't actually change the objective quality of the thing you're looking at. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah. Natural law is an objective thing, right? It exists. But some people will argue that, well, they might have one person has one perception, another person has another, and so it can't really be there, or it can't really be an objective thing, which I would say I don't think that has any bearing on whether or not it exists.
And some people are arguing that it just cannot be seen at all.
Exactly.
But still, it's objectively there.
Right. But I would say that it has to be at least somewhat perceived. Okay. Somebody's got to be able to find it. Otherwise, what's the whole point of this thing?
Exactly.
My point is to say not everyone has to perceive it equally.
That's a good qualification. Yeah.
So that's where I'm kind of going with that. All right, so those are the three kind of guiding principles, and then as we walk through different texts, hopefully demonstrate one or more of those are present in each of those texts. And the first most important is Genesis 1 and 2, the foundation of the world, creation of the world. In it, we see that God creates and orders a universe. All right, so everything is kind of finds its proper place, right? Fish don't live on land, they live in the sea. Birds live in the sky, animals live on land, right? Everything finds its proper place, okay? A lion doesn't belong in the middle of the ocean. It can't survive there, and it's not put there, right? It's put in its proper habitat, in its proper place, and creation has an order and structure to it, right? There's routine, there's morning and evening, a day, right? There's all these things that make the world function. It's not just chaotic or random. All of a sudden something doesn't change, right? It is the way it was created to be. All right, so that's Genesis 1 and 2. And we see this is important because you have to have an ontological foundation for moral order. So this is, I thought was a helpful quote I'm going to read from David Haynes and Andrew Fulford. They write this: "The very fact of divine creation seems to point towards what has been traditionally called natural law, the notion that there is, because of divine intellect," remember that from the last episode, "a natural order within the created world by which each and every created being's goodness can be objectively judged, both on the level of being," that's ontological goodness, "and for human beings specifically on the level of human action, moral goodness. Ontological goodness is the foundation of moral goodness." So a moral order, right action, cannot exist apart from a moral, purposeful, ordered structure. There has to be within creation itself an order to the way things work. And Genesis 1 and 2 presents that, I think, very, very clearly.
So you're saying that the physical makeup of the world isn't natural law itself.
Right.
But they are closely related. Without the one, you don't have the other.
Yeah. You have to have a place within which natural law to exist. Mm-hmm. And if natural law of its essence is a ordered and purposeful thing, it must exist in a structure that is also ordered. Right. And we'll talk more about how does the fall affect some of these things, but we would recognize that the world doesn't fundamentally lose its makeup of objectivity. Right. It's just it's marred or hurt in some way, and there's debate about that. The other thing in Genesis 1 that I think is very important is the image of God. Mm-hmm. And this will come up if you're read the literature on natural law, is within mankind there has been placed in us a moral capacity. And I think that comes from the image of God. There's a lot of debate on what the image of God is.
Exactly.
Is it personality? Is it rationality? Some people in the natural law camp who are outside evangelical circles will argue that fundamentally humans are rational creatures, and they distinguish that from animals, which are irrational, right? They're instinctual. They act on instinct, not reason. Like a squirrel doesn't reason, all right, I have 6 nuts for the winter. I have a deficit of 12. I need to keep gathering nuts. It's just instinctual. It just does what it's supposed to do. Humans
You just disappointed a bunch of people about their pets, but
pets. Your dog is not as smart as you think your dog probably is. I love dogs. I'm okay with dogs, but anyway.
So rational being important to being an image bearer.
Yes. Yeah. I think in the image of God is that rational capacity, but it's also a purposeful capacity. So this is Genesis. I'll read. This is Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, the creatures that crawl on the earth." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and fill the earth," or "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." So from the very beginning, the nature of humanity as created in the image of God is married to the function of humanity, right? Let us make man in our image. They will rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky. God created them in his own image, and God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful," right? They're created with this function. And so when you start talking about, we talked about human flourishing or goodness, moving a thing towards its purpose is kind of the point of natural law. It's the idea that there is we exist as humans. Our nature has a created function and purpose, and we flourish or align with the good of our nature when we align our actions with the purpose of the way it was created to function. Right? There is an order to things and a way we are supposed to live. And so from the beginning, human nature is created with human function, is married to human function. And importantly, I think within the image of God, you have male and female. That actually it's not that one is the image of God and one is slightly off from the image of God, but that actually both together image God. Because how can you multiply and fill the earth? Well, you have to have a male and female.
Exactly.
So when you start talking about principles of natural law, secondary type precepts, we'll come back to all of this, but this is kind of laying the foundation of what does it mean to be good and ordered? How do we move towards the function that we were created with? And it all starts right here with our nature as rational creatures, created in the image of God to rule and reign on this earth, right? We have a nature and a purpose. So that's the first, Genesis 1 and 2, that's the first big one. And again, I'm skipping over the fall because we'll come back to it a little bit later. What are the effects of sin on the mind and how we perceive this. But at least in the beginning,
right,
created good and perfect and created to function well within God's good design. All exist as essentials to human nature.
So essentially, doing what we were created to do is the right thing, right? At the end of the day, it's right for us to fulfill our function.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. And don't hear, some listeners might think, okay, created for a purpose, they might individualize that. What I'm talking about is on a much more, a broader level, humans as a category, right, as a species are created with functions, with purpose, and we should be in line with that and fulfilling those. And we can talk about exactly what that looks like. The next really important passage is the Noahic covenant, Genesis 8 and 9. Importantly, the covenant is universal. It's made with all of creation, and actually I'll just jump over there because I don't want to skip over it too quickly here.
So we've zoomed ahead to the other side of the flood. This is the covenant made with Noah after he gets out of the ark.
Yes. So God says to Noah, whoever sheds man, this is 9:6, whoever sheds human blood, by humans his blood will be shed. For God made humans in his image. Two quick thoughts about this are, I've often heard what's the penalty or the sin being committed there is the shedding of human blood, and what makes that so terrible is for God made humans in his image. But I actually now think, and I've read this from others, that for God made humans in his image is actually connected to the second part, by humans his blood will be shed. So why is it that humans have the capacity to carry out capital punishment? It's because we're created in God's image, that we are the exactors of civil justice on, in this age, on this earth, is kind of the way this is set up. And go ahead.
I was just going to say that's an interesting observation, because we might think that it's not right for us to take someone else's life, that we're somehow doing something that's contrary to God's will. But you're arguing that's actually a delegated responsibility. It's actually something God has asked us to do.
Right. And importantly, distinguishes from murder, which is, this is capital punishment, is not murder.
Exactly.
So it's not that any taking of life is strictly forbidden. It's the wrongful taking of life is what is forbidden, right? Whoever sheds man's blood. So, and then importantly, some other functions of this, or some other characteristics are important. This is verse 8. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, understand, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, livestock, all the wildlife of the earth that are with you, all the animals of the earth that came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, and never again will every creature be wiped out in the flood waters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. And so basically, the covenant, what I said was, it's universal. It covers the whole scope of creation. And this is important when we start talking about, remember last week, we introduced the concept of two governments.
Right, two spheres.
Yeah, two spheres. In dispensational literature, the government's word is used most often, or two administrations possibly, but administrations tend to get used for the specific dispensation. So what you have happening here is, at the beginning of creation, everyone is created good. Then humans sin and fall from God. And so over the course of time there, the only thing to rule over creation is individual human conscience, right? The Lord saw the wickedness of man's heart, and he only did evil continually, right? There's no outside mechanism for restraint on human sinfulness. So God comes along, wipes out everything, and essentially starts over with Noah, but now instituting this idea of human government, right? Who is it who exact justice or carry out this capital punishment? And it's humans. So God sets this up as a restrainer on human sin. And importantly, there's a lot of research, or a lot of work has been done, and people can go look this up and read it for themselves. But some authors show a lot of characteristics or a lot of similarities between the covenant with Adam and the covenant with Noah, that they both have this kind of idea of purpose, order, that sort of thing. But the stark difference here with the Noahic covenant is there's no mention of redemption. There's no mention of a kind of teleological end by which this thing is pushing. It's simply that it's kind of a restrainer. It's just a preserver of this kind of civic realm. And we recognize redemption will actually come through another means, right? It comes through the redemptive realm, through Jesus Christ as the only way of salvation. And because in theory, right, Adam, if he had perfectly fulfilled the laws of God, would have been confirmed in holiness, right? He would have been kind of the savior, if you want to put it that way. But he would have been our representative of righteousness. But because he sinned, that purpose is no longer an option, right? We need another representative, and that's where Jesus comes in. But importantly, in the Noahic covenant, and this is what's important for, excuse me, the distinction between the two governments is, in one, you don't have the promise of salvation. You have the promise of preservation, that the Lord will sustain the earth. He will sustain the seasons, and he's making this covenant with all of creation, with all of humans and animals, and that he'll sustain it. And then we need to look for redemption somewhere else.
Right. So basically, Adam is given the privilege of being a vice regent underneath God's rule.
Right.
Noah is being given the same type of privilege that's now extended to the rest of humanity,
Right.
but with further revelation, specifically addressing how to govern unredeemed people who are going to commit murder. And these types of sins are going to happen.
Yeah. And importantly, it provides the enforcing mechanism for natural law. So it's not just everyone is kind of doing what's right in their own eyes. It's now giving a system at a very basic, bare bones kind of level. But the idea that we should pursue justice, proportionate, reciprocal justice, right? And the whole point is, and if you look in the Old Testament law, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of stuff was established to fight against outsized justice, right? The idea
supposed
that
to be proportionate.
Yeah. So like if I steal your sheep, you shouldn't get to murder, you shouldn't get to kill me, right? I have to pay for what I've done.
Exactly.
But it's to stop that kind of thing. So justice should be proportionate, and it gives that kind of enforcing mechanism, right? If shed man's blood, by man will his blood be shed. Okay.
That's helpful.
So that's the Noahic covenant. And that's, if you think about the continuing revelation there, it's kind of the next step. Another way we see this play out is in the book of Proverbs, and specifically Proverbs 3 and Proverbs 8. Proverbs 3 talks about wisdom and its role in creation. Let me pull this up. Proverbs 3:19, the Lord founded the earth by wisdom and established the heavens by understanding. By his knowledge, the watery depths broke open and the clouds dripped with dew. So the basic idea here is kind of going back to that Genesis 1 and 2 concept, that creation is ordered, that it is purposeful because it operates according to wisdom, and in fact was founded by wisdom. Proverbs 8 talks about wisdom being a companion along with the Lord in forming the earth. Right? So if you think about Proverbs for just a second, kind of back up from the natural law discussion. Proverbs offers general truths for life in God's world, right? If you want to generally be successful, it gives you the way to live, God's way to live in God's world. Why does it work? Because the world tends to operate in an ordered manner. Something, I should expect that if I wake up early and go tend my vineyard, I'll get a crop. Right, and I can be successful in that. The plans of the diligent lead to abundance.
There's a predictability to the world.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that comes from unorderliness, and it's not always true, right? Because of the fall, because of sin, bad things happen, stuff happens, and
sometimes even the weather guy is wrong.
Oh yeah, well yeah. Weather guys most of the time wrong, but yeah, like it's just you can generally expect if you do this, you will get this outcome. Right. So Proverbs points to that. Well, where does that come from? Why isn't it that if I go and work my field or gather in harvest time that I should expect to be poor? Because the world's not created chaotic. Right? The world is not at its core chaos. It is ordered and has been created with a purposeful function. Again, marred by sin, but generally is ordered and structured. And Proverbs, I think, shows us that. And it shows us, too, that people can get generally good success. Like, it points to the success of the wicked, right? The success there isn't salvific, but it's kind of a temporary civic success that, they might be wicked people. They don't acknowledge God, but they have learned to make a profit. They've learned to tend their field or whatever it may be. Now, to get true wisdom, you have to recognize Proverbs 1:7, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So to understand the world through the lens of true wisdom, you have to have a relationship with God. But that doesn't negate the general truth for all people that Proverbs talks about. And that's because of the created order, right? That other people can operate within that.
Yeah, because looking at Proverbs 3:19 through 20 that you just read there, I could see the response maybe from a listener that, well, these look like the laws of nature, as in like the law of gravity, the law of thermodynamics, the way the world is made. But what you're saying is that actual forming of the world leads to a way that we should live. Right. So we should be able to look at the orderly nature of this world and then reasonably draw conclusions of how we should respond to that.
Right.
So the forming of the world, even though maybe here in 19 through 20, he's not specifically talking about how we as people were formed.
Right.
But it has implications for how people should live. Is that essentially what you're arguing?
Yeah, I think so, because Proverbs goes to moral conduct, right? It points to the ontological foundation of the world as a reason for acting in certain ways, right? It wants you to live according to wisdom. It wants you to, choose God's path over foolishness, right? Because this is the way the world was made to function. Right. So, and one thing, I'm not thinking, so again, natural law, the natural part of that is not like the law of gravity.
Right.
Right. It's not like the laws of physics.
There's two distinct things.
Yes. Yeah. Right. But the essence of the world and the creation is linked to, right? And I would be including in that human nature, the way we are created to function, is linked to the moral oughtness that we should live in.
Right. They're related to each other because we all have the same creator.
Exactly.
Right? Laws of nature don't function independent from God.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think importantly, Proverbs presents, and I'm borrowing this concept from some others, but Proverbs, I think, helps us when we start talking about natural law because it doesn't present a list of do's and don'ts. It presents a moral framework or a moral order maybe by which we can think about the world and understand how it is to function. So if I give an example of King Solomon, right, when the two women come to him and they both claim, it's my baby, no, it's my baby.
Exactly.
And he says, okay, we'll chop it in half, we'll split it up. Think of all the things going on there to come to that correct conclusion. There's no verse in Proverbs, he wrote Proverbs, but there's no verse that says, hey, if two women come to the court and they have this dispute, then here's what you do.
Right.
He's understanding.
Get out your sword.
Yeah, he's understanding the nature of motherhood, how moms generally have affection towards their children, right? I mean, these are they're two prostitutes. So he's probably not assuming a whole lot of following God's law.
Right.
Right. So it's, he knows, all right, even an unbelieving mother is going to want her baby to live, even if that meant she couldn't have him. And then a grieving mother, she just is angry, right? She's ready to go scorched earth, and she doesn't care who lives or dies because she's lost her baby, right? He understands that's how the world functions and makes a good judgment call on how to determine who's the right mother. Right. And so that's the kind of thing I mean when we start talking about living according to natural law. It's not that if I had enough time, I could sit and write out all the commandments of natural law. It's a framework by which we understand how the world generally functions and how we can live. And this is why some authors will say the way to learn natural law is growing in wisdom. As we observe the world, as we think about how the world operates and functions and grow in our understanding, we can also grow in our use of natural law. So that would be Proverbs. So Genesis sets the foundation. The Noahic covenant kind of handles the sin issue, not totally, we'll come back to it, but not totally, but puts a restraint on sin, provides a preserving element for the civil realm, gives a way to enforce natural law, and to kind of oversee the whole thing. Proverbs, I think, is more down-to-earth, practical, shows yet the world was founded according to wisdom, so we should generally expect it to operate in certain ways. There's other texts in the Old Testament, I think, that can help here, and they point to unbelievers. So this is that third kind of group. At least some unregenerate people perceive this. And probably the biggest example of this is in Genesis 20 with Abimelech. So Abraham is passing through the area there, and he recognizes there's no fear of God in this place, is what he says. And so he tells Sarah, hey, say you are my sister so that these guys don't kill me and take you, because apparently she was very pretty. So they do that, and Abimelech, who has a harem of women, right? Like it's not like he is, one man, one woman for one lifetime kind of guy.
He would be like the two ladies in the Solomon example.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, he's clearly an unbeliever. But sees Sarah, takes her, and the Lord comes to Abimelech and says, what have you done? You've taken a married woman,
Right?
And they hadn't had relations or anything like that yet. And Abimelech doesn't say, "Oh well, I didn't know that was wrong." He says, "I didn't know she was married. I thought that she was his sister." Right. So here's an unbelieving pagan who at least recognizes some sanctity in marriage, that's something you shouldn't violate. And so he returns Sarah and Abraham. The Lord says, "Have Abraham pray for you that wrath doesn't come upon you." But here's an unbeliever. Well, where does he get the idea that marriage is something you shouldn't violate? Well, it has to come from some observation of the way humans function, from some revealed created order. Because he doesn't have, the law has not been written yet. So how is he supposed to know this? And so I think that's probably the best example in the Old Testament. There are others. I think Moses' father-in-law, when Jethro comes to Moses in the wilderness, he's led the people out of Egypt, and Moses is sitting there judging, the people all day. And Jethro says, "Why don't you set up a structure and you have people handle lesser matters, and then they can work their way up to you." Well, here's an unbelieving, pagan who is offering wise counsel to God's prophet. How, and again, this isn't the same on the same level as the marriage issue. But again, I think he rightly recognizes a function and order to the world that, these lesser matters, they could be handled by somebody kind of at a lower level, and then they could work their way up. That's a pretty wise and practical way to solve the problem that Moses is addressing. And Moses seems to think, it's a good idea, and he does it. And so, again, there's some debate about that passage and what's going on there. But at the base level, it does seem like, here's an unbeliever who recognizes an order to creation, the way we function, and acts in light of it to produce a good, right? Helps people live more in line with their purpose, right? They're not made to bicker, right? They're made to subdue the earth, fulfill it, that sort of thing. So those are probably the key Old Testament texts.
Yeah, I think you've given us 3 good examples of texts in the Old Testament where you have an unbelieving person who's able to make wise or moral decisions based on something that's been woven into their fabric of their being. So moving to the New Testament, what New Testament text do you think would be relevant here? I believe in your thesis you made 3 arguments or 3 things that the New Testament texts establish regarding natural law. Do you want to just kind of quickly walk through those and some of those texts?
Yeah, those are the same 3 arguments that we pulled out before. So I tried to show in both Old Testament texts and New Testament texts that these are there. And again, I'm pulling from helpful resources like the David Haynes and Andrew Fulford book. But to rehearse them, there is an objective moral order. That order has been revealed, and that at least some unregenerate people can perceive that order. And so to do that, I looked at a couple of passages, but I started with Jesus in Matthew and Mark, and then looked at Paul in Acts and some passages in Romans. So the big ones that stand out to me, at least in Jesus' teaching, number 1 would be Matthew 6. Jesus is talking about not being anxious. Now, there's some debate. Obviously, he's speaking to a crowd that is familiar with the law, familiar with God. So this is kind of
they have some special revelation.
Yeah. So, whether or not this is like a good, hard and fast, unregenerate people is a little bit debated. But I think the way he argues helps to inform us a little bit. So he's talking about not being anxious, and he says, "Look at the birds of the air. Doesn't your Father in heaven care for them?" Right? They don't gather into barns, they don't sow, they don't reap, but your Father feeds them. How much more valuable are you? Your Father will certainly take care of your needs, right? So don't be anxious. Don't worry about it, right? God will take care of you. And again, he's pointing to a creation reality that humans by their nature are more valuable than birds, more valuable than animals. God cares for his creation, right? There is a creator and he cares for it. So us being more valuable than them, we shouldn't worry. We shouldn't be anxious for anything, because if we're more valuable than animals and God cares for them, it tracks that God would care for us as well. It gets a little tricky, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but we have a culture that's heavily steeped in the Protestant tradition. And so, there would be some argument that, well, okay, yeah, but everyone has some history of Bible. Mm-hmm. And that's true, but I think the scriptures are a way we can understand natural law, but I don't think that negates in us this innate reality that human nature is more valuable, that life is good. I mean, just to give an example of this, I saw on social media, someone had shared a video of some police officers who had basically a kid. It was like a 911 call, and they had the body cam footage that got released, but a kid had fallen into a swimming pool and essentially was drowning. And so the parents were able to get the kid, but he wasn't responsive. And the police showed up on the scene, and they were able to do CPR, and they got the kid, breathing again, and he was fine. I think anyone watching something like that, I mean, you are fundamentally contrary to your own nature if you don't watch that and think like, well done. Like good for those guys to show up, to do their job, to save that kid. No one can look at that, unless you're just a psycho, and think like this is, you should look at that and think this is a good thing. Mm-hmm. So where does that come from? Yeah, sure, maybe some teaching from Bible, but I think there's something in our heart that shows and testifies to us that is good. I mean, Abraham Kuyper actually, when he's talking about this, he would say, man cannot escape the ever-present thou shalt that exists within him. And he's talking about that implanted moral capacity from God. Right. Like you can't escape it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Theologically Driven. We're going to pause our discussion there and conclude next week. So come back for part 3 of our series in natural law as we wrap up the discussion. Theologically Driven is a podcast of Detroit Baptist Theological Seminary. If you would like to learn more about our seminary, you can go to dbts.edu.